Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar. Today I'm here with our VP of Strategy Innovation, Anthony Jackman, to talk about Expedient Edge, the problems we're solving, who we're solving it for, and how it can help you bring your cloud to the edge. And I kind of want to bring this back to the beginning where we've had our services evolution over the last 20 years where we've built a lot of services inside of our four walls. Co-location, DR, backups, cloud, VDI, where we've even taken things out to multi-cloud, but kind of what brought Edge to the forefront for us?
Let's go back a little bit, right? How did we first get out of our four walls, right? We started probably with disaster recovery, right? Because we were a target and we were bringing workloads into our cloud. But then over the past few years, probably maybe the past 6 years, we've had some clients that had a need to have a localized cloud in their location, right? So they wanted the same value prop, they wanted it to be consumable, they wanted it as a service, and they wanted to add a number of other value add services on top of it. So we've been able to do private cloud for quite a while, but the issue was it was just too big, both in terms of a cost and a size footprint perspective. The logistics of getting it to all those remote locations could be quite difficult. And really, it's just almost a people scaling problem for us to enable this for tens or hundreds of sites, potentially per client. So the real goal was to shrink the footprint down, both in terms of cost, size, power footprint, cooling requirement, and also to solve for the logistics of putting this in a lot of places.
And what's sort of driving that use case of that localized workload? Because we've been talking for the last probably 10 years now at this point that everything's going to go to the cloud. Everything should be in the cloud. Why are you running anything on-prem? So kind of what are those use cases that we were trying to solve for?
So there's a few of them. Probably the primary driver is latency to equipment, and a very close second is availability, right? Now, locations can have multiple redundant internet paths, so from an availability standpoint, maybe they're very confident that their connection's reliable, but however, that workload needs to be very, very close to its compute. So our number one driver right now is manufacturing sites. These are companies that are running operational technology, and it literally is what runs their business. If those machines are down, they are not making any product, they are not making any money. So they really have a need to land the compute within their four walls to keep the latency sub-millisecond and to be sure that as long as their building has power, whether it be grid power, generator, whatever it may be, that their workload is staying up and running along with their operational technology.
So how are clients solving this today? Because clearly this isn't a new problem. So what are they doing today to actually try to meet the needs of their business?
Yeah, you're absolutely right that it's not a new problem. Often we are going after new workloads. We know that clients are expanding their IT footprint and we're trying to capture that new workload. In this instance, we're often trying to replace an existing solution they have, whether it's because they're up for a hardware refresh, or often it's just because they've run into challenges. So today, it's DIY, right? Sometimes it's centralized IT running it, not typically. Often it is the operational technology team who's actually running this, and what that means is that they're not always experts on the IT side of the house. They're smart people, they certainly can figure out, and they have figured it out, but it's not necessarily their area of focus. So what this leads to, whether it's the IT side reaching over to OT or the OT side reaching over to IT, is employees that are kind of out over their skis a little bit. They don't have the cycles for it. Often the business isn't making enough investment in it, and we generally find that these workloads struggle a little bit. So it's in-housed. It's generally, a mix of hardware. It's rare to find all the sites using the same thing because it's been built and cobbled together over the years.
Someone bought something at this company, someone bought something at that company, and here's an infrastructure.
Right, yeah, exactly. So, very much homegrown, looks different, and it's just a struggle for them to manage. Generally, each site is treated as a silo or an island where it's run in and of itself. And clients are really just looking for a better level of service across the board.
So let's talk about how we actually set out to solve this problem. And I think we can really start with this wonderful piece of hardware here. So this is our Edge pod. This has 3 nodes in it to start. You can add a 4th node. It is really, really tiny. This is 8.5 inches wide, 8.5 inches tall, and about 17 inches deep. So it's not very big, which then kind of fits that size footprint that you talked about earlier. And was that kind of what we designed this around?
Yeah, absolutely, right? Because in the data center, space isn't a problem. You have a rack, things are a standard size. You go up to 42 of them in one place, it's not a big deal. But our clients don't necessarily even have a rack, and they maybe don't want to. They might want to run it on a desk. Literally, we could run this on this desk right now. It's not required to be in a rack. So obviously a very small footprint. Another important thing is the power footprint of it. Data center equipment generally requires a little bit more thought to how you're powering it. This can plug into any standard wall outlet. As it could just be a single one, doesn't even need to be redundant.
And then when you think about this is a small box. How many sort of workloads can we put onto this? Because this, in a lot of times when you see compute get smaller, the resources get smaller. And so the types of workloads that can land on that get smaller. Kind of, what is the scale of this platform?
A lot more than you would think. So we like to say, for nice even round numbers, this is a great fit for that 10 to 100 VM workload. But quite honestly, you could fit many more than that depending on your particular workload. So we have kind of t-shirt sizes of it, small, medium, large, which for the processors means 12 cores, 24 cores, 32 cores per blade, up to 4 blades. And the RAM, we've chosen to just give each size one amount of RAM to optimize performance, and that can go all the way up to 1.5 terabytes of memory in the box, which is quite a large workload.
I mean, that's a lot of RAM in a very, very small box. And then from a storage standpoint, because one of the things that you also find is, network cameras or databases that live at these sites, these workloads that need to stay local, it's not like because they're local, that doesn't mean they don't have storage requirements. So, how much storage can we put in one of these?
Also, quite a lot of storage can fit in here. So first thing, all NVMe. Very high performance, also very tolerant to things like vibrations. Unlike spinning disks, vibrations, dust, etc., it's going to handle all that very well. And we can get very dense on the storage. Each blade can handle up to 7 3.84 terabyte capacity drives. So in aggregate, we can get to, how much is it?
About 30 terabytes, I believe?
30 terabytes usable. Before compression, we like to swing conservative, give the clients the benefit. Whatever compression they get is theirs to have.
And then from a security standpoint, all of that is encrypted.
Absolutely. Encrypted at rest is really just table stakes at this point.
Right, you have to have that. And then when you mentioned dust, and you mentioned these are going into manufacturing facilities, they're not exactly known for having the most hospitable environments. So kind of, is this built to go into those hospitable environments and inhospitable environments, excuse me, and how does that actually work?
Yeah, it is. I mean, you're not going to want to dump water on it. It is electronics. However, the number one environmental that this can deal with is temperature, which is really what is a problem at these types of sites, right? It's not a very well air-conditioned data center where it's 74 degrees every day of the year. This can run up to 130 degrees Fahrenheit at 100% of its performance profile in perpetuity. So it actually exceeds most of the temperature standards.
And I think that's sort of key for these areas where we're putting them when we're talking about manufacturing, and even in retail spaces where you don't have that computer room, right? You don't have all that cooling to help with all of that. But this is really more than a box.
Right.
It's really cool to have this hardware and to have all these capabilities at the site, but what are we doing beyond that? Because you mentioned each of those sites were previously treated as a silo, so how are we helping with that problem?
So first off, we're going to help with that problem just in terms of how we actually deploy it to the site. Even that can be challenging. So we've solved for deploying these at scale in terms of number of clients as well as number of sites per client. So we've figured out how to drop ship this gear directly to a client site. The cabling diagram is extremely basic. We're talking about 3 or 4 cables, power cord into the wall, call Expedient and tell us, hey, it's there, or you can use our white glove installation service. It's going to show up in our portal and register to a centralized management console. That centralized management console is how our clients can control all of their workloads, no matter how many sites they have.
And I think that's key, because in the manufacturing space, you have maybe 20 or 30 sites, and that's fine. But when you start talking about retail and putting one of these in, say, every single retail store, that scale becomes paramount.
Yes.
Otherwise, you're managing 500 or 700 different sites. Being able to do all of that in one place is really, really powerful.
Absolutely.
And then what are we able to land on top of this? Because you mentioned that we're kind of coming out of our 4 walls. So what can we take from our 4 walls and put onto the platform?
So most of Expedient's service portfolio can be laid on top of this. A couple services that are kind of tailor-made for Edge, our cloud file services platform can land on this. That's really unique in that it can give clients 100% of the performance they need while offloading things to the cloud in the background from both an availability, a durability standpoint, but also for keeping costs down. So that's a great service that can go on top of this. Our operations control product can go on top of this. So if clients need a little bit of service above the virtualization layer, they need us to step in and help them to patch and monitor and maintain their operating systems, we can do that as well. And our entire suite of security products, including backup, can go on this as well. So we can ensure your workloads are safe. We also can ensure that they're protected. If something goes wrong, we can restore them. And those backups can happen locally, and obviously we're also going to replicate them to our cloud.
Right, so we're protecting those backups. And one of the things I hear about in terms of Edge as an overall term is we want to run containers in cloud native at the edge. Can this run a cloud native platform as well?
Yes, a few years ago, Expedient launched our play on cloud native, so we can do Kubernetes as a service. That Kubernetes as a service platform can natively consume the Expedient public cloud. It can also natively consume this. So if a client is starting to move towards more of a containerized workload, we can lay that platform on top of here. They can develop those workloads, and more importantly, they can do it the same way they are in their centralized cloud as well.
And then that same platform can be used to manage multi-cloud, so they can manage AKS, EKS, and GKE from the big hyperscale providers as well.
Right, yeah. I mean, we can take their existing Kubernetes clusters and adopt them into it, so they can actually get a higher level of service on their existing platforms because it'll give them unified visibility, one way to patch, monitor, maintain.
That's really, really powerful. And I think that's sort of where the Expedient value proposition comes in, because when we started to solve this, we were really targeting those manufacturing facilities. We were targeting retail facilities, and kind of talk through that sort of plant IT, because we've been working with a client on this and kind of the problems that they were seeing and what they wanted to solve.
Yeah, we're working with a number of clients on it, and the problems that they were seeing, number one, availability. What we've found is that the solutions that are in place today have generally not been sized appropriately, or they haven't been sized appropriately given the growth that their workload has seen over the years. So maybe steady state, they're running okay, then they patch a node. Node comes out of the cluster, all of a sudden their CPU cycles spike up towards 100%, and their plant equipment is dropping packets out of its historian.
So now that we're pushing these nodes out to these edge sites, how are the clients bringing that together and actually seeing all of that and managing it together? And are they having to patch all of these things for themselves?
No, absolutely not, right? It wouldn't be a great managed service if they had to do that. So we're giving the clients the benefit of one place to log in, one place to view everything, one place to deploy and manage their workloads, right? What's important to their business. But on the back end, we've deployed that infrastructure so that we can reliably manage it at scale, which obviously includes patching. It might sound trivial, right? Over the years, updating these things has gotten a little bit easier. Not the case whenever you have tens or hundreds of sites, and you need to be able to do those all within a reasonable time schedule. So client gets to just forget about that. Expedient's going to manage all of it. Also, that management plane we've built to be deployed through automation, so that whenever we're going to give this to a client, it's as simple for us as collecting a number of variables from them, clicking the button. Now, why do the clients care? That means it's going to be done right the first time, and they're going to get their service quickly. That service is also highly available across multiple cities. So if the primary instance of that management plane runs in Pittsburgh, if Pittsburgh for some reason goes dark, it's going to automatically move to Cleveland. Clients aren't even going to know that anything has happened. They're going to be able to continue to manage their workloads.
And that management plane, we built that using our own technologies, right?
We did.
Awesome. Which technologies were those?
So at the base, this is a VMware-powered cloud, so there's a number of VMware pieces in it. The automation plane is a lot of homegrown things that we've built through tools like Ansible, Terraform, et cetera, that allow us to deploy and manage these things at scale. And then there's obviously a lot of network chops in there. So we have a service we call Push Button DR. This is actually powered by Push Button DR. Nice. What that means is that when it fails over, nobody knows it has moved. The public IPs move. There's no pointing to a different DNS server. Everything just kind of magically happens. And
that I think that speaks to the power of what we've built over the last 20 years of having DR and our own cloud, so that when it came time for us to build something, we trusted it to build for our clients in that manner. So when we started talking about solving problems, you mentioned that every single one of these sites was a silo, and bringing that together under one central plane. What does that do from an infrastructure standpoint?
So I think I get what you're hinting at here. What if a site's internet connection is down and it can't talk back to us? Is this what you're talking about?
I feel like centralized control means the control plane is somewhere else,
right?
Which is kind of the concern I think a lot of these clients had in terms of moving their workloads out. So by having management external to the site, what does that mean for those workloads that are running on site?
It really kind of gives them a best of both worlds in that this unit itself and whatever compute is running in here is not reliant on the management or the control plane. Meaning if that site goes dark from an internet perspective, their workload is going to continue to running. So they obviously lose access to some things, right? Well, what don't they have? Can't go deploy a new workload, right? Because the management plane's down. Your backups may not replicate off-site. They're still being taken locally. Your data's still being protected. The replication can't happen. When the link comes back, replication is automatically going to spin back up and catch up.
And then you mentioned kind of earlier that there's a people problem, right? You have the OT side of the house managing these, or you're starting to grow into too many sites, but maybe there's not enough people to support all the sites. So how does Expedient help in that regard from a scaling standpoint?
So obviously we talked about the deployment, right? That's number one. Your people don't have to figure out how to deploy this. You can literally just tell us this is the location where it needs to go, and here's the site access procedures, and we will take care of the rest. We will obviously build the platform for you and then continue to patch and manage it. If there's any hardware issues, we are going to handle the break fix. We're going to send someone directly to site to do that. Let's say that you started with 3 nodes because it fit and then your business grew. We can give you 50% more compute by adding in that 4th blade. 3 blades, n+1, you only have 2, add 1 more, 50% compute.
Wow.
All you got to do is make the phone call. Expedient will send someone out to the site, insert another blade, grow your compute capacity by 50%.
I think that's kind of incredible because very rarely do you add 1 to 4 and get 50%.
Right.
So I think there's also the services that expand onto that and kind of taking on those additional pieces. And when we scale that with the people, I think there's a really, really powerful solution here. And then how does that fit into that manufacturing space in terms of we've built a ruggedized platform to go into those locations? Kind of what are we seeing from these clients that are working with us from the manufacturing side of what they're able to go do from that?
Well, really what it lets them do is forget about all the headaches they had and the issues they've had patching and maintaining these things, and they get to go focus on, okay, well now I know the compute's working well. If I have an issue, it's in my OT software, and I can go address that directly. Or I can, up the level of service to their internal client of what they need. So as a great example, one of the first clients we're working with thought that they could get more value and ultimately save money if they turned up the granularity of their historian, because what they're doing is collecting millions of data points about all the gear in their plant, and they're using those data points to tweak and tune their process. But the more data you collect, the more compute you need. And they were kind of stuck, and this allowed them to jump over that hurdle and go deliver value back to the business.
And I think that's really where the overall Expedient story really sits in terms of building solutions that help provide clients with the time and the capability to focus on the things that actually matter, which is improving their business processes or improving their products and not worrying about keeping the lights on. I think this is a really, really great solution. And I think we can turn it over now to the audience for questions. Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We've been taking your questions and answers on Twitter and LinkedIn using the hashtag EXPEdge23. You can see that down below, and you can put in your questions to have them answered now. We have gotten some questions, so we're going to go ahead and take the first question here. Our producers, Nick and Nick, are here. They've been collecting all these questions. The first question here is the edge expandable? What if I need to add more resources later? And I think that's kind of how we built the whole platform, right?
Right, yeah. As we said before, our default is to put 3 nodes in the platform, and the reason we want to start with 3, if possible, is that it allows you to add that 4th node, which actually adds about 50% more compute.
How does he do that?
3 nodes, n plus 1. So only 2 of it we're counting as usable. You add 1 more node, we're actually going to add 50% more compute. That's the first way you can expand it. The other way is, as we said, this is kind of t-shirt size, small, medium, large. So let's say you started with a 3-node small, you steadily grew, we added a 4th node, and your business expanded a lot more than you thought it was going to.
We hope that happens.
We hope that happens, right? The easy thing we can do is set another one of these alongside of it, bring it online, a medium or a large, and live migrate your workloads over. So there is the flexibility to upgrade or replace the hardware as needed, because again, it's less about the hardware and it's more about the service that you're getting.
Right, and I think that's kind of key here. It's that you're not necessarily stuck in the specific size when you bought it. Let's take the next question. Does Expedient have a way to install Edge for me? I don't have people at all of my sites, and I think this is kind of one of the bigger challenges of Edge, is that it's not just in one data center or a couple data centers, it's all over the place. So how do we help clients who maybe can't install it for themselves because they don't have any people there?
So yeah, right, installing one site, fairly simple.
Yeah.
Installing 15, 20 starts to get difficult, especially if you have an aggressive rollout schedule. So we do have a white glove installation service where our project managers will schedule with you when that installation is going to happen. We'll dispatch someone to the site along with the hardware, and they'll effectively plug it in, call Expedient on the other end, and validate that our service is online and we're good to go and start getting your workloads migrated. And
I think that's kind of key here, because that allows you to effectively scale your people very temporarily to get everything into the right places.
Right.
And that's really sort of the base of why we're building this platform, is to help you scale not just the technology stack, but the people as well.
Right, a big part of this was solving for logistics of how we deploy all of these sites reliably, consistently, very quickly.
Awesome. Let's go ahead and take the next question here. What kind of monitoring and patching is Expedient doing? And I think this is a bigger challenge that a lot of folks who have built an Edge platform kind of run into, is how do you manage and patch and monitor everything across all these sites? So how is Expedient doing this maybe a bit differently?
So one of the things we did strategically from the start was we tried to make this look like an extension of our current cloud suite, right? Okay. We've been running many cloud pods for a very long time across all of our data centers as well as at client sites, and we've developed a very robust way of monitoring those. So we wanted to extend that onto this rather than build net new, because that allows our monitoring analysts to take advantage of all the tool sets and all the automation that we've already built. So we know when these things come online, they're effectively just plugging into our existing monitoring and management pipeline. You know, that's how we manage the base platform. But again, our monitoring and management can also extend into the operating system layer. And from our perspective, whether your workload's running on Expedient Edge, in your data center, or it's in an Expedient, or if you're running in a hyperscaler on another platform, if we're monitoring the operating system, it looks the same to us everywhere.
And I think not only that technology stack, but also the knowledge stack. We've been doing this for a really long time at a larger scale than most clients are actually doing this. So I think that's an opportunity for you to take advantage of the scale that we've already built and all of the effort that we've put in over the last 20 years. Let's go ahead and take the next question. We're a retail organization. Could I put this in our stores? And we talked a lot about manufacturing as the sort of target use case that we originally brought this out. But retail is another one of those sort of spaces where how do we actually get these into the right places and be able to do distributed computing? So how do we put this? How does this fit into a retail space?
You're correct that retail is also interesting. It's probably our number 2 behind manufacturing in terms of demand. And what we're seeing is that retailers are increasingly putting more intelligence in their stores. They're putting cameras there, they're recording where people are going, how often they're visiting certain areas of the store to understand where demand is, and analyzing that data locally is becoming more and more important. So there is demand from retail, and in terms of how this fits into a retail outlet, again, we don't care where you put it. It doesn't have to go in a rack, doesn't have to be temperature controlled, it can just sit on a desk, it can just sit on a shelf. If it's something where it's an environment where you really want to keep the noise down, this can be delivered in a noise-proof cabinet. So retail really is a great fit for this as well.
And I also think that's not a small reason why we made this, well, we went with a physically small platform like this. We wanted it to be able to go into those sorts of spaces where they don't have the physical space for a whole rack.
Right, we didn't want the client's location to be a limiting factor for adopting the platform.
Got it. All right, let's take the next question. As always, by the way, hashtag EXPEdge23 on Twitter or LinkedIn to get your questions in as well. Is this like AWS Outposts? Because it sounds really familiar. And I think it's very easy to compare the two. But talk to me through how they're different.
It's easy to compare the two because they fall under the blanket term of edge, right? But if you ask 10 people what edge means, you may get 10 different answers. It's certainly like Outposts in that it runs a workload locally at your location, wherever you need that to be. It's unlike Outposts because it serves a much broader range of workloads, right? You can enter in at a much lower cost point, but you can still scale that up. It's also much more familiar to most clients in terms of how they're operating today, right? A VMware-based workload. You don't have to re-platform, you don't have to use native PaaS services. You can pull your workloads over as they exist today onto this platform.
And I think that same sort of physical size thing comes into play here because Outposts, even if you buy it per node, it's still rack-mounted hardware. It is designed for rack capabilities.
It has very specific site install requirements, and we tried to run towards the opposite of that and really make this fit anywhere.
Right. You can plug this into a random three-prong outlet and get it powered on in a ton of different locations versus needing to have larger scale power. Let's take the next question. Can I run this on my own hardware? And I think that's kind of missing where this is really fitting. That we're moving away from all that hardware, right?
Yeah, the whole point is that you get to forget about your hardware. You don't need to think about that anymore. As we said, this is generally an existing workload that's either expanding or it's just due for a refresh. And what we can do is slot this in alongside your existing hardware to handle a migration or a transition period, and then it goes from there. Obviously, you can run your hardware alongside this. If you have some other things, some specialized systems that you need to maintain, those can continue to run. But the entire idea here is that you get to forget about the hardware, forget about the infrastructure, and focus on your application, your workload, what's important to drive your business.
Right, and even those things that might be still physical, like maybe a network camera system where all the recordings are coming back to one large box, or a physical appliance for like door and gate security, those things can still live right alongside this, and it's all interop network-wise, where it can still talk to all of the virtual machines that are running on the platform. So you're not losing anything. You don't have to replace everything to get the value out of this.
Right, just the compute piece of it, right? We continue to interact with your systems as you are today, and you just have a lot of burden lifted off of you.
And we love to do that. Let's take that next question. Hold on, we got another question. There we go. Is this only available in the US? What if I have locations outside of the US? And as a, let's be transparent here, we have 14 data centers in 10 cities inside of the US. So for the vast majority of our platform in life, we've been building things inside of the US. So can we take this outside of the US and hit more locations?
We can. We're primarily dealing with US-based customers, but those US-based customers have international operations, and actually a number of the clients that we're working with on Edge already have a few of these sites, and they want those sites to look just like the ones that are in the US. So the answer is yes, we can deal with this internationally, and it will look just like the rest of your sites.
Is there any sort of constraints there? And I think that kind of comes back to where and how we ship this. And I think that's just something we need to be more cognizant of up front. in terms of what countries?
Sure. I mean, you could contact us if you have more questions, but effectively export-controlled countries may have a few issues. There's not very many of those. Probably not many companies that are functioning there. But outside of that, there's not too much. We need to know which country it is. Things like power standards matter.
Yes.
We have to figure out, and again, we will handle this for you, the logistics of importing it to that country, getting it installed with remote hands, and bringing it online.
And I think just if you have any specifics, you have a specific country you want to ask about, please get in touch with us. Contact us, and we can definitely talk through that use case. Let's take the next question. How much does it weigh? I don't have a full rack. Can it go on a shelf?
So we said this once already.
Yeah.
It can go on a shelf,
It
right?
can go on a shelf. You did mention that earlier.
I think
Right there.
right there, between 28 and 51 pounds, depending if you're small, medium, large, 3 nodes or 4 nodes. It'll vary a little bit, but kind of max you're looking at is about 51 pounds.
And the other part of that question there is around, can it go on a shelf? Like, not everybody has the ability to put a full 4-post rack in. This can go on a 2-post rack. So there is a way to do that, but that would be part of that upfront, discussion. What we want to do is not just say, hey, here's some hardware, off you go. It's we want to build this and make sure that it is correct for the site that you're loading it into. We can go to a lot of different places, but that means that we have a bunch of different options to be able to utilize. All right. Any benefits of using Expedient as a service provider related to licensing?
Yeah. Again, this is meant to be consumed kind of like a cloud service, right?
Right.
Obviously, we're going to have a base fee to land this on your site and light the service, but then we try to make this consumable. So as your workload grows, obviously your bill will go up a little bit, but what that allows us to do is allow you to enter at a lower cost point that makes sense for you, versus if you're going to do it-yourself hardware, generally you're licensing the entire box, which can really be pretty expensive because you're licensing not only the full capacity, but also your redundant capacity you're having to license. When you consume from us as a service provider, you're only paying for those workloads that are actually running.
And I think that is a key thing to think about, is that you're not in the perpetual licensing model. You're able to go into a true consumption model from a licensing standpoint, from a Windows licensing and a VMware licensing standpoint. So there is an opportunity to really only pay for what you're using on top of the platform.
Not only that, but you also get to forget about the concept of licensing overall, right? You're not maintaining an ELA with multiple software vendors. You're just consuming a service from one vendor. We are handling the licensing on the back end.
Yes, and we have a whole lot of people who are very, very good at making sure that you are getting the best value out of that whole licensing. So that is all for us that we have today. We want to thank everyone for joining us. Please reach out you could reach us at expedient.com. There's a Let's Talk link in the top right corner of the page. You can reach out and contact us. We're so happy to have Edge out into the market. We hope that we can go solve some real problems for our clients and you, and we will see you next time.